I know it is for me, and I've seen a lot of people come out of this retreat and do wonderful work. I just don't think there's any substitute for sitting down with people, even when we're all spaced around the room and wearing face masks. No substitute for rolling up the sleeves and looking at your manuscript and giving you direct feedback so you can help make your book as good as it can possibly be. Thank you all so much for coming. My interview this time is with Marcia Preston, who is an extraordinarily gifted author. Her first novel was a mystery called Perhaps She'll Die, and she has written many books since then, including Song of the Bones, which I mentioned at the top of the podcast, which won all kinds of awards, The Butterfly House, which sold all kinds of copies, and several other wonderful books. She's also spent many years editing and publishing Byline Magazine, which was a wonderful publication for aspiring writers. And she's got a new book coming out. Marcia, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, traditional opening question. If you could give one piece of advice to an aspiring writer, what would it be?
I think be prepared to do draft after draft after draft. I'm a big believer in revisions. I never send a book out before it's been through many, many, many drafts. And I think you never really know your characters until about the third draft. So that would be my tip. Be prepared to run it through the computer many, many times.
That's interesting, because I think, you do everything well, but I think of characters as being what you do extraordinarily well, bringing unique and interesting people to life on the page. And yet that's a process. Doesn't happen in the first draft?
Not for me. I think I know them going in, but what I find is that during every revision, I learn new things about them. I feel like all of a sudden it's coming from them instead of from me. And I feel like they're just much deeper and more fleshed out by the third draft. I don't know, that's the draft that seems to do it for me.
And then on the fourth, you can think about the plot, or
well, yes, plot and revising more of the mechanical areas of revision instead of the depth of character. By then, I think I have the people pretty well in hand.
Plot and then language, like you were talking about.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How many drafts do you think? Do you have a target number of drafts?
I don't, but it seems like I go through about at least 10 on anything that I'm ready to send out.
No, I completely believe that. That sounds entirely reasonable. Speaking of books, you've got a new book coming out soon, don't you?
I do. I'm so excited because it's been a while. This book is The Spiderling, which is a baby spider, in case you don't know. But I promise the book is not about spiders.
That's not a selling point, I think.
No, it's about a little girl and her mother, who they're an army family. And the dad, the soldier, is the roadside bomb that kills him in Iraq, also destroys the mother, Libby. And the little 11-year-old girl, Kiwi, is terrified now that she's going to lose her mother as well as her dad, because her mother's behavior reverts to the way she was as a teenager, which was very troubled. And the soldier husband kind of rescued her from all that, and now she's regressing. So it's their story. It's the fallout from the war in Iraq on the families.
Sounds like this is somewhat of a change of pace for you. Am I right about that?
A little bit. I would say it's probably a literary book, but it's also women's fiction in the way that it's about the change in this mother and what she has to learn to become a good mother to Kiwi by herself. And it's really the little girl's book as much as anything. She grows and changes and turns out Kiwi's a survivor, and she almost becomes the parent in the family for a while.
I mean, realistically, you started writing mysteries and wrote suspense fiction fabulously well, won awards, the Mary Higgins Clark, which is given at the Edgar Awards. You could have just done that and had a fabulous career, but you've decided to be more diverse. Why?
I have, but, I'm an English major, and I fell in love with literature, and so when you start writing as an English major, you try to write the great American novel.
Yes, I've tried several times.
Yes.
But
So I figured out that wasn't working so well, and thought, well, I need to switch to a genre. And what do I love in genre read? And that was crime fiction, mysteries.
Right.
So I switched to that and began to get published, and then was picked up by a larger publisher with women's fiction type books. So, but I just finished up the third in that mystery series here recently.
Really?
So I'm still switching back and forth.
That's really interesting. I've heard people sometimes say, well, I thought I'd write a few genre novels just to get my foot in the door, and then I'll write something, serious, which you can imagine how I feel about that.
Yeah.
And I always tell people that's not how it works. All your publisher will want is more genre novels, but you've proved I'm wrong.
Well, they really are right in a sense, because they do want you to just stick with one area and stay there.
That worked, do it again.
But yeah, I'm stubborn that way. Sometimes I just want to write what I really want to write. So I'm still switching.
Good. Are there any switches in the future? Are we going to find you doing science fiction next, or
no? Definitely, you have to have too much history in that field to know your stuff to do that well, and I couldn't do that. But I love crime novels, and I love mainstream. I read a lot of literary novels, and so of course I'm still working on things like that.
I'm curious. I'm sure you're tired of having people ask, "Where do you get your ideas?" Which, what are you, Cleveland? I mean, what are you going to say, really? But I'm interested because your book contents are so different and diverse. How does it start for you? Does it start with an idea? This new book, where did that come from?
It's different every time. This book about the Army family, I have a son who is career military and two granddaughters that grew up as Army brats. And when my son was in Iraq and Afghanistan, of course, I was terrified for him and for those little girls, about what would happen if he actually was killed, and there was a good possibility of that. So that's where that book started. One day my granddaughter was standing in the kitchen talking to me and says, well, we're moving again. It'll be a new school. I'm always temporary. I'm temporary everywhere I go. And that is a line that Kiwi uses in the book. It's that feeling of not being totally grounded. But then when her dad is gone, she learns to miss that Army family, because in a way, the whole Army is a family. Not just the soldier, whether it be a man or woman, is in the Army. The whole family is in the Army. Right.
That's. Is there a similar story for that for all your books? Some moment when you thought, "Hey, that could be a book."
Yes, for the new literary one I'm working on, it was a place. It was St. Simon's Island, Georgia, in the marshes of Glen, and I had gone actually out there to a writing event and. Was really taken with that area, and I didn't know anything about it. I think a lot of people have never heard of St. Simon's Island, Georgia. And so it was the actual kind of mood of the place that got me started on that. That and a quote from Sidney Lanier's The Marshes of Glen poem that was hanging on the wall in the room where I stayed. One of my books came from a TV commercial.
Really? Which one was that?
That was The Piano Man. There was a commercial about a man who had received a donated heart from a teenager that was killed in a wreck, and he received the boy's heart. And in the commercial, the mother of that teenage boy meets the man who has her son's heart and lays her hand on his chest where her son's heart is beating. It gave me goosebumps every time I saw it. I'm getting them right now. And so that idea for that book about a heart transplant and the mother that hunts down the man that has her son's heart, that came from that commercial.
Wow. I see commercials. I don't think I've ever gotten a good idea for a book from one.
Well, that was a special commercial.
Or a special mind at work. I'm curious, as I mentioned before, your book, they're all successful one way or another, but The Butterfly House was a huge seller. Do you have any idea why? What made that one the breakout book?
Partly it was the publisher, because they have offices in London and they publish books. They do their own foreign rights. And so they took care of all that. That publisher, as a matter of fact, told me, well, sure, you can go do book signings and things like that if you want to, but it doesn't really matter on the numbers, that we take care of that. And that's not the same thing you hear from most publishers. So
Right.
I was kind of lucky there. But because they had an office in London and then published in France and Australia and Germany and other countries, your sales go up when things like that happen. So
Interesting. See, I thought you were going to say it's all about the insects. Butterflies sell books, and that's why you're doing spiders now, because that's the key. If you don't mind, I know it's a thing of the past, but talk a minute about Byline Magazine, because that was such a contribution to the world of writers, and particularly aspiring writers. How did that get started?
Actually, a man in Oklahoma, where I live, started that magazine, and I heard through the grapevine that he wanted to sell it. And I was a subscriber, so I was familiar with it. And I was teaching at the time and decided I didn't want to teach school anymore, just really didn't want to teach school anymore. I wanted to get something in my field, which was writing. And so I couldn't get a job. I couldn't find another job. I was 40 years old, or almost 40 at that time, and they didn't want to hire. Nobody wanted to hire a 40-year-old school teacher that didn't want to teach school anymore. They're going, no, we can get a kid right out of college to do this job, and what's wrong with her? So I couldn't get a job, so I bought a magazine. And my husband said, "Go ahead, honey, I'll help you all I can." So.
And how long did you do that?
20 years.
Oh, wow. That's a long haul.
And freelance. I was doing a lot of freelance writing then for magazines and things, back when there was a market for freelance magazines.
Yes, at one time it was not a bad way to supplement your income, but are there still magazines? I don't
well, there's no Byline anymore.
Right.
I finally sold it, and it went right out of business. But no, there's not a lot of freelance work in magazines anymore. It's sad, I think.
Something that occurred to me that was interesting, both of the times you talked about, where you got the ideas for your books, it was basically a germ of plot that came to you. Okay, so here you've got the story idea. How do you pick the characters that you're going to put on top of it?
I can't answer that. They grow in my head. I'm not sure where they come from sometimes, except probably the Spiderling is the exception, because I had two little granddaughters who were Army brats. So,
right.
And that character really came from them.
So is that them on the page? Is a little
bit
the soldier your son?
It's sort of a mixture. That they're not like their lives were not like that at all. But that lifestyle, And I put my one of my granddaughters is real adventuresome and is liable to do anything, and the other one is very cerebral and smart, and she's the one that called herself Temporary. And I kind of put those two aspects together in this little character of Kiwi, who is really smart and also willing to try, not afraid of anything.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like it's going to be a terrific book. What's the title of that again?
The Spiderling. And
it's out in...
release date's in November.
Sounds fantastic. Marcia, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it.
Thanks again to Marcia for being on the podcast. I thought that was a terrific bit of insight into a terrific novelist. Let me just remind you, you've missed this writer's retreat, but I can guarantee there'll be another one. And if you want more information about that, please check my website, which is williambernhardt.com. And I can guarantee that WriterCon is still going forward over Labor Day weekend in Oklahoma City at the Skirvin Hotel. You can come in person. We will not cancel. Or you can stream the entire 3D conference from your home. If you can't or prefer not to come, I get it. Stream it. You'll see everything everybody else does, and you'll have several opportunities to watch it. So even if your schedule is busy that day, you'll be able to watch it another time and take that opportunity to invest in your writing career and maybe bump it up to the next level. You can also have the opportunity online